Billy Chambers. I was in Ecuador from 1962 to 64. I worked in an ag project, ag and home ec extension in Ecuador, and I have been back twice in the early years after Peace Corps, within the first 10 years. Hadn't been back for 34 years and lost track of everyone. And in 2008, I went back and found people that I had known in the past. Actually was talking a few minutes later on one woman's cell phone to her parents who'd moved out of the town 20 or 30 years before, and I ended up staying in the homes of several people during the time that I was there. I returned and visited them again in 2010, and I'm leaving in 10 days to go back a third time.
Hi, I'm Rhoda Brooks. My husband Earl and I served in Ecuador. Peace Corps Ecuador 1, 1962 to 64. We were stationed in Manta on the Pacific coast. And then 18 years later, we went back to South America again, this time to Chile, and we brought our 4 children, and we were appointed the country co-directors of Chile. So we served twice. One story is that we adopted 2 Ecuadorian children while we were there, and we had our biological son, and so when we came home we had 3 kids, and now I have 7 grandchildren with those 3 children, and the adopted children are now 50 and 51 years old. So that's an exciting piece of story. Yes, thank you so much.
My name is Tabita Hernandez. Married name is Doro, and I was in Ecuador, the first group that went to Ecuador between 1962 and 1964. And we worked in community development, but we learned more from the Ecuadorians than we ever taught them.
Bob Vondero, Ecuador, 1963-1965. Stationed in Quito, and I was the controller of the Ecuadorian National Credit Union Federation.
My name is Bobby Houlihan, and I was in Ecuador from 1963 to 1966. In fact, my group met the day before Kennedy was shot. So, and then we went off to Puerto Rico and training down there. It's wonderful that I'm still in touch with the tribe to a certain extent after all these years, and the daughter of one of the Indians I worked with, who I remember him as a 17-year-old putting his cigarette out with his bare foot, and his daughter works at the UN. So it's really quite an extraordinary thing to have happen.
My name's Jane Nakayama Cole, C-O-L-E, and I was in Ecuador 64 and 65. Didn't quite finish all my, but that's okay, to my 2 years. And I was with the Heifer Project, which was a program that worked with the agricultural extension agents in Ecuador. And my husband, who is not here, was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador. He was with the first co-op group in Ecuador. He's Kenneth Cole. Yeah, but he's not here
I'm Mike Harrington. I was in Ecuador in 1964 to 1966 in what I call a village, Gualaceo, but it was about an hour's bus ride from Cuenca, which was then, and I assume it still is, the 3rd largest city. Okay. I thought of another story that I think it's important to share. It's sad because it involves the death of one of the volunteers. He was not in my same group, but his group arrived at the same time our group did. And I believe he worked with the credit cooperatives. But he had gone to the Oriente, which someone else talked about, and that's the Amazon side of Ecuador. And at that time, you could only get there by air. But he wanted to see the Amazon, and he wanted to visit one of the rivers and so forth. And he went to Sucua. It was the Rio Sucua, S-U-C-A, I think is how that was spelled. And to be able to ford the river, you had to have a local guide, an indigenous guide, who could help you across the river. There were no bridges or anything then, and he attempted to ford the river with a guide and a Catholic priest who unfortunately wore all of the clerical garb, etc. And it was most likely the priest, but someone slipped as they were fording, and it caused them all to go underwater. And they never found the priest's body. They said he was probably so weighted down that he never surfaced. But they did find Jim's body, and the local man, of course, knew how to deal with the river. He survived. He probably helped them find Jim, but the personal part of the story is he was out of the Cuenca office as I was. And after they had retrieved his body and brought it back to, I guess we'd call it a morgue, where the Ecuadorian equivalent was, he was just lying on a cold concrete slab. But the local Peace Corps director, area director, and the office talked about the government says his body cannot be shipped back to his family in the States until someone will come and say, yes, I know Jim Hughes, and this is Jim Hughes. And nobody wanted to do it. And I said to one of my good friends, who was a good friend of his too, Barry Hirsch from Arizona, I said, Barry, let's go do it. It's just Jim. And I remember they pulled the covering back, the sheet or whatever it was, back. And we only glanced quickly. But I said, yes, this is definitely Jim Hughes. And as I've told some of my friends, he was even wearing his Jim shirt. He had a JIM shirt. He was wearing a plaid shirt that everybody kind of knew as Jim's shirt. They would recognize him in the distance in this red and white plaid shirt. But I also knew that he was formally engaged. And I decided that in his room, as they were getting things ready to mail back to the States, I wanted to copy down his fiance's address and that I would write to her. I said I thought she deserved a letter from the field of action, if you will. And of course she wrote back and wanted me to continue a correspondence, which I didn't want to, but I think she appreciated that letter a great deal. I did not write to his parents because I felt they probably got more attention than she would, and she had written to him regularly. But he's now, when you see a list of volunteers who died in service, he's near the top. It was like 6 or 7. And it was Barry and I who did the official identifying. And I found out the one thing, and this is another outgrowth, I guess, of being Peace Corps, having a friend die no longer scared me as much as I would have thought it was at one time. And in my era, this would have been 1965, lots of my contemporaries were dying in Vietnam. And so I suppose drowning in a river in the Amazon was mild compared to that. But Jim died doing what he wanted to do. He really wanted to go to the Oriente. Thanks.